Otis Pruitt found the leak before sunrise, just as the sky over the farm was turning pale gray. He stood in the hayloft with a coffee mug in one hand and a flashlight in the other, looking up at the barn roof. A thin line of water shone along the old tin. One drop, then another, fell into a metal pail below. He sighed and wiped his mouth with the back of his hand. The roof had been patched twice already. One more hard rain could push the water right down into the feed room. If that happened, the hay would spoil, the grain would go damp, and winter would get expensive fast. Down in the yard, his pickup sat hitched to a stock trailer. Inside the trailer, his granddaughter's calf was making a soft, restless sound. Otis smiled a little at that. The fair was the calf's first big trip, and maybe the family's best chance to bring home enough money to fix the roof before the fall storm started. He went down the ladder and crossed the yard toward the house. The kitchen window was bright now. His granddaughter, Molly Pruitt, was already up and at the table, tying the red ribbon around her braid with quick fingers. She was 12, with a sharp face, brown eyes, and the same straight mouth Otis had seen on his own daughters when they were worried. "You checked the roof?" "Yep." "Bad?" "Bad enough to make me think about it all day." Molly looked down at her plate. She had not eaten much. There was toast, a fried egg, and a slice of peach from a jar he had canned in July. "Daisy's feeling okay?" Otis nodded. "She's nervous, but she's okay. You did good with that red halter. Easy to spot, easy to grab." Molly smiled at that, just a little. Daisy was the calf Molly had raised since spring. She had bottle-fed her when the cow got sick and the calf needed help. Daisy knew Molly's voice, knew the rattle of the feed can, knew the sound of the screen door. She was a good calf, strong and calm most days, with a white blaze on her face and a habit of following people like a dog. Today, though, the fair would be loud. Loud enough to shake even a calm animal. By 7 o'clock, Otis had Daisy loaded, the trailer door shut tight, and a bale of straw tied down in the bed of the truck. Molly climbed in beside him, holding a paper sack with sandwiches, a jar of water, and a clean cloth for Daisy's nose. The county fairground sat on the edge of town, just past the grain elevator and the bowling alley. By the time they got there, the whole place was waking up. Farm trucks rolled in, one after another. A line of 4-hour kids in clean jeans and white shirts walked toward the livestock barn, leading calves and pigs and lambs. The midway rides were still quiet, but the bright poles were already lit, and the smell of fried dough drifted across the parking lot. Otis parked near the cattle barn and climbed out. The air smelled like dust, sweet feed, and fresh sawdust. Somewhere a generator hummed. Somewhere else, a man laughed too loudly. He felt the fair in his bones right away, the same way he had felt harvest time for most of his life. "Morning, Otis," called Hank Mercer, coming out of the barn with a clipboard in one hand. Hank was broad-shouldered, with a gray mustache and a striped cap pulled low over his forehead. He had lived 2 roads over from Otis for 30 years and knew the smell of wet hay as well as he knew his own truck. "You bring the beauty queen?" Hank asked. "Best one I had," Otis said. Hank laughed. "That what you told the feed store too?" "No, I told them I needed a new roof." Hank's face went a little serious at that. He looked at the trailer, then back at Otis. "Well, let's get her in there." Inside the barn, the show ring was marked by white rope and fresh sawdust. Metal fans pushed the air around, but it still felt hot. Calves stamped and shifted in their stalls. Kids brushed coats until they shone. Mothers handed out paper towels and cold water. A few grandparents stood near the wall, wearing farmers' tan lines and holding folding chairs. Molly led Daisy out of the trailer, and Daisy blinked hard at the light. She tossed her head once. The red halter stood out against her dark coat like a flag. "Easy, girl," Molly said. "Good girl." Otis took the lead rope from her hand. "You can stay close if you want," he said. Molly nodded and stayed by his side. The judge came through the ring just after 9. He was a thin man in a tan shirt, with a pen behind one ear. He looked over the line of calves, wrote something on his clipboard, and called the first group into the ring. Otis stepped in with Daisy and felt her shoulder tremble under his palm. He kept one hand on the rope and the other near her neck. He knew her tricks. He knew when she was about to swing her head. He knew when she was thinking about backing up. He knew the feel of her breathing through the halter. The judge moved down the line. "Walk them out," Otis asked Daisy to move, and she did. Her hooves made neat sounds in the sawdust. Molly stood outside the rope with her arms tight around her middle. Otis caught her eye and gave a small nod. Then, just as the judge stopped near the far end of the ring, a sharp crack split the air from the midway. A ride had started, and one of its metal cars slammed into place with a loud bang. Daisy jumped. Her front feet skidded. Her head snapped hard to one side. The red halter slipped loose at the knot, and before Otis could catch it, she lunged away from him. For one long second, the whole barn seemed to freeze. Then Daisy burst through the open gate and into the bright fairground lane. People shouted. A child dropped a sack of kettle corn. A woman stepped back so fast she nearly fell into a bench. The judge stopped walking and turned toward the gate. 2 boys hauling a bucket of water jumped out of the way. Daisy ran straight into the open lane, where the lights were already on, her hooves kicking up dust under the bulbs. Otis did not think. He moved. He grabbed the feed bucket from the bench by the ring and yanked a scoop of sweet feed from the sack beside it. Then he pushed through the gate. "Clear the lane!" he shouted. "Clear the lane!" His voice was rough and loud, but not angry. It was the same voice he used at home when a cow was skittish or a calf would not settle. Molly was right behind him. "Daisy," she called. "Daisy, girl." The calf paused for half a breath, ears straight up, then bolted again toward the glow of the midway. She looked small and wild under the fair lights, her red halter flashing at her neck like a ribbon in the wind. Otis shook the bucket so the feed rattled against the metal. The sound made Daisy slow. He kept walking, not fast, not slow. He made himself look calm. He lowered his shoulders. He let his boots scrape through the dust. The bucket clinked again. "Easy now, Daisy," he said. "Easy, girl. There you are." The calf stopped near the popcorn stand. The smell of butter and salt drifted through the air. She leaned her head a little toward the bucket, then jerked back when a carnival worker shouted from behind her. "Hey, watch that gate!" Hank Mercer came out of the barn at a run and slammed the side gate shut so Daisy could not bolt farther down the lane. Another man, one of the auction helpers, lifted his arms and waved people back. "Give him room," he called. "Let him work." The lane began to open around Otis. A little circle of dust and light formed there, with Daisy inside it breathing hard. Otis held the bucket low near his knees. "That's it," he said. "Come on now. You know this sound." Daisy took one step, then another. Her nose dipped toward the feed. Otis could see the white line on her face. He could see the thin shine of sweat near her eye. He kept talking in the same even tone. Good girl. Good, Daisy. That's my girl. She edged closer. For one moment, under the fair lights, she looked as still as a picture. Otis reached out with his free hand, fast as he could but not wild, and caught the loose end of the red halter near her jaw. Daisy threw her head once. Otis planted his boots in the dust and held on. Molly gasped, but Otis did not let go. He slipped the knot back tight with one hand, then tucked the lead rope under his arm. Daisy gave one last hard pull, then stood, blowing through her nose. There she was, red halter on, feet on the ground. No more running. A small cheer rose from the lane. Someone clapped. The judge, who had come out after them, smiled and shook his head. Well, Otis, he said, you sure know how to make a show of it. Otis gave a short laugh, still breathing hard. Did not plan it that way. No, I suppose not, the judge said. Bring her back in. She's still in class. That was the best news Otis had heard all morning. He walked Daisy back into the barn. The calf stayed close now, her ears still twitching, but her feet calm. The smell of sweet feed followed her. Molly stayed near her shoulder, speaking in a soft voice. Hank held the gate until they were inside again. A few minutes later, the class went on as if nothing had happened. Daisy walked better than before, maybe because she had been scared, and then found again. She moved with her head up and her back straight, the red halter bright against her dark coat. The judge looked her over twice, asked Otis a few questions, and wrote something on the clipboard. When the class ended, he called Otis aside. Nice calf, he said. Good shape. And she settles well once she trusts you. Otis nodded. She trusts the girl more than me. The judge glanced at Molly, who stood there with her hands jammed into her back pockets. That may be true, he said. Still, you handled her right when it mattered. Daisy placed well, better than Otis had hoped after the scare. That was not the end of it, either. At the junior livestock sale that afternoon, local buyers came by the ring with their checkbooks and their hats in their hands. The first bid was fair. The second was better. Then Mr. Lewis from the grain co-op raised his hand and looked at Otis like he meant it. I'll add 50, he said. Another man from the feed store raised it again. The auctioneer's voice got faster. Do I hear another? Who'll make it even 3? At last the hammer came down on a number that made Otis feel his chest go loose. It was enough for the roof tin, the nails, and the lumber for the worst part of the frame. It was enough to hire a man from town if the weather turned bad. It was enough to get the barn ready before the first hard rain. Molly looked up at him when the papers were signed. We made it, she said. Otis folded the receipt and put it in his shirt pocket. We did, he said. On the drive home, the sky was turning gold over the bean fields. Daisy was gone by then, sold to a buyer who promised she would have a good home and good feed. Molly had cried a little when the trailer left the fairground lot, but not for long. Otis had told her that a good calf deserved a good next step, and she had nodded, even if she did not like it much. When they reached the farm, the roof crew was already waiting. Not a real crew, just Otis, Hank, and 2 neighbors with hammers and a bundle of shiny tin sheets bought in town before dark. The 3 men climbed the old boards and started in on the worst places first. Molly handed up nails in an old coffee can. The whole barn rang with the sound of hammers. The next week, the first real rain of fall came hard after supper. Wind moved the trees. Water hit the yard in a steady sheet. Otis stood in the doorway with Molly beside him and listened. No drip from the feed room. No splash in the hayloft. No slow leak into the old pail. Just the sound of rain on new tin, sharp and even and clean. Molly leaned her head against his arm. "You think Daisy remembers the fair?" she asked. Otis looked out at the dark barn, where the roof shone wet under the porch light. "Oh, I remember it," he said. And he did. He remembered the dust in the fair lane, the bright bulbs over the barn gate, the way the calf had flashed through the light with that red halter loose at her neck. He remembered the weight of the bucket, the sound of his own voice, and the whole town making room for one small farm animal and one old man who was not ready to lose his roof. Inside the house, the supper dishes were stacked by the sink. The storm moved on. The barn stayed dry. And for the first time in weeks, Otis Pruitt felt winter coming, without fear.